Hello, everyone. This is Cynthia Mazzaferro with Powerful Beyond Measure. And I'm so excited to have another wonderful author here today. And we're talking about something totally different, politics and the political life and how it works and the way it's an oiled machine and what our author did to get out of that. So her name is Leslie Sorrell. Hello, Leslie. How are you?
I'm good at Sorrell. I should have told you.
Oh, okay. Thank you for letting me know that. My apologies. I should have asked you more specifically. And look at Leslie is in Belize. So are we jealous or what? How beautiful this beautiful backdrop is. So let me tell you a little bit about Leslie, her bio, and then we'll get right into the book she wants to talk about today. As a Fox Radio News contributor and founder of the Magnolia Group, a political consultant firm of national influence, Leslie has worked for many candidates and causes, including notables 2008 Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney, former Majority Leader Eric Cantor, former Transportation Chairman Don Young, and Senator Ted Cruz and Senator Rand Paul. Quite an extensive list there. Sorrell's firm reputation for its results-driven approach, filled with a team of committed difference makers, allowed them to successfully meet their clients' goals of running for political office and having big campaign war chests. In 2012, the super PAC that Leslie was on formed. She was in the top 50 PACs in the country. However, in growing the Magnolia Group, her clients showed that the system incentivized corruption, and her self-respect would not allow her to continue to advance their ilk to those institutions she held in esteem. Through their win at any cost approach to life and politics, her clients succeeded at killing her desire to be part of their system. So she walked away, but only after a career filled with the exciting and challenging tasks of getting candidates. Before anyone knew their names or thought their jokes were funny and were elected to office. A recovering political junkie, she now spends most of her days in a small fishing village in Belize, but still maintains a home in Columbus, Mississippi. So, Leslie, what a wonderful treat to have you here. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. So you go from working maybe 14 hours a day or 10 hours a day into this wonderful life of living in Belize. What is the major difference in your quality of life and what the focus in your life is right now?
Well, I lived a pressure cooker environment. I loved it. I thrived in it. But I don't have those anxiety-filled days. I don't get the calls at 3 a.m. of the crisis or the speech that needs to be written. Instead, it's a lot more about relaxation, and I do yoga now. There's time for that, so it's a much different lifestyle.
I can imagine. I can imagine. So do you have a copy of your book? It's a wonderful title, by the way, Clients to Crooks, an insider reveals the real Washington, D.C. Can you bring it up a little farther, closer to the camera's eye? Look at that. Isn't that a great cover? I love that. So when did you actually think that you were going to write a book?
Well, that was never in the original plan. I had always kept journals growing up, and after the election where I took on one of my former clients who was a United States congressman and with an underdog and lost, I really had a hard time moving forward, and I was writing to heal myself, to explain what happened. And during that process, I thought, well, if I told that story to others, would I be able to make the political system better? And that's when it evolved into a book as opposed to a journal writing for myself.
Right. So what you're actually saying then is, I'd like to know is, so when you give everything and you're working this political campaign, how does the losing team actually, and the people that work it, never mind the candidate alone, how do you actually internalize that loss that you were saying you were struggling with?
It's very hard because, like I said, you're spending maybe a year into a race, so it's not just a few weeks or a few months when maybe the public is starting to pay attention. You've devoted a long time and spent a long time with that person. For me, it was just heartbreaking to lose, but also it was more of the loss of faith in the system at that point. I really had a tipping point of here I had dedicated my life to politics, to making a difference, to thinking I was putting good people in office. And this was just a horrible moment in my life that I said, I don't believe anymore. And I think many people have had heartbreak, maybe not with a career in the same way, but of a loss of faith in something.
Right. You put your whole heart and soul into something, and then, of course, you're buying into the candidate, but the candidate, of course, is hiring the firm. And so there's, you belong into the system, and whether the person's a really great client or not, or a crook, you still have to support and to promote that person. So there is definitely got to be a lot of emotional integrity, and also the conflict of when you're struggling and putting so much time in there, and then having the loss or the win. Both ways you can go, because you had many wins too. So what did you hope to accomplish in writing this amazing book?
Well, I really think that there is not enough stories out there that explain. I was really fortunate. I had great clients in the beginning, and they went up to make a difference. They wanted to serve their country. But during that process, they fell victims. The system really does incentivize corruption. It's hard to say no to that. So I watched them kind of fall one by one, where they went from serving the country and it was a sacrifice to it wasn't much of a sacrifice, and they were serving themselves instead.
That is, I think the political arena is so, right now everyone is disgusted, no matter what party you're in or belong to. I think the whole political arena, for many different reasons, we're not really going to get into that. We don't want to make this a contentious interview,
Right.
But it's really very, very much dedicated views, and people aren't willing to relent and hear, and kind of that give and take. This is the road I walk, this is the way I perceive everything. If you're not on this, then I look everywhere else. Corruption, there's corruption or collusion or whatever the word you want to use there, and it's very much even more so today. Don't you think that it's even more so rampant?
Well, I think what's happened is no one wants to have a conversation anymore, but I think part of that is fueled by the office holders themselves. They really want, I think, the American public to think that it's about the red team versus the blue team, but it's really about American citizens versus those serving us. It's supposed to be citizen legislatures. They're supposed to go to Washington, serve for a while, and go back home and live with those same laws that they've made. Instead, they go up there and they self-serve, and they want us to be distracted and to not care enough so that they can keep doing those things. I think there are people out there that are very divided, but I actually think that it's not a very exciting story. It's not drama enough reality TV to say we actually have a lot more in common, and we need to not fall for the system of we're just sports teams trying to duke it out. We're Americans first.
Right. And just for anyone listening to the interview, I want you to realize that the static you might be hearing on the interview is due to the beautiful Belize winds on the beach there. So we're just going to look at those static noises more as I wish I was on that beach enjoying the sunshine and the warmth and the beautiful breeze in your face. So just to let you know, we're not having technological difficulties here. It is actually just the wind that's being present in our conversation here. So you must have really, as you ventured out to write this book, you must have really worried about what was the backlash. How could I divulge some of these things? What was your biggest fear in writing that book?
Well, one, my biggest fear is that no one would care, that everyone is so busy with their lives that they let the urgent take over the important. But I actually wanted to, these were good fellas. They meant well, but they fell victim. So I I was heartbroken. So it wasn't written in a way that was anything other than that. But I actually tried at first to write it as a fiction book, and it didn't seem believable. So I had to name names, and I had to tell people who they were, because otherwise it's such an incestuous world. I don't think it came across as believable, ironically.
So what makes the political candidates turn to the corruptive world? You know, how do they get teased to take on some of the positive or the self-serving motives?
Well, part of it is they create laws that are different from the ones we live under. So, for example, members of Congress can use their congressional knowledge to trade in the stock market. If you and I did that, we would end up in jail. They have example after example of how they've changed the laws, and they don't want anyone to pay attention to it. They do gerrymandering, which is kind of inside politics talk of, they create a system where it's very hard to not win re-election. And so they just systematically do it, and they're not like exciting things, so people don't know, and they seem like small things, but over and over again, over time, that benefits them. And so they're getting wealthy, and they're doing things that you and I wouldn't be allowed to do. And so if you say no to it, there's not really a reward to it. But if you say yes to it, you can do like one of my clients did and double his net worth from 25 million to 50 million in 2 years.
Wow. Wow. Well, one of the things I know I've read, and I don't have statistics in front of me, is that all the representatives, the senators, they all get retirement for life. And, you know, it even exceeds what the president gets. And it's just amazing that you could just have one term, and for the rest of your life, you get that stipend. And it just seems that, you know, our federal, so often now, even in the regular professional world, we don't get that. I mean, they used to have that pensions way back in the previous decades of work, but now you don't do that. Companies cannot thrive and be paying off employees forever and ever. So, I mean, it's something I think that is really unfair. And, but that's my own personal point on that. Were you aware of that as well?
There's so much misinformation and so much, it's hard for the average American to know what all is going on. Because again, like I said, so many people are trying to make sure their kids go to good schools and make sure, you know, they're paying their bills and these type of things. And it's hard for them to pay attention to what all the nuance is going on inside Washington, D.C.
Oh, exactly. And they want, the red wants the blue to look bad, and the blue wants the red to look bad. It's just so much. And so let's get into that a little bit. So what makes your book different than all the others out there talking about the swamp of Washington?
Well, I think so many are told from a distance. They talk about hating Washington, but they don't know anyone in Washington personally. It's easy to hate and be upset if you don't know someone. But I really liked these fellas. I admired them, and that's what I think it's interesting to watch a fall from that perspective. But there's a lot of anger in the tones of books, and I think this isn't told that way. It's told from, I was by their sides. You know, I knew them before others knew who they were, a household name. We went through the hard process of campaigning together. We really got to know each other, and so the American public can appreciate a story that's not just full of stats on how horrible Congress is and what they do, but this is a real American story.
It is. It is. Now, have you had any backlash after writing this?
Oh, yes.
Can you share some of that with us?
You know, it started before the book was out. Ronald Reagan would say you should not talk ill against a fellow Republican, and that became known as the 11th commandment. And I broke that commandment. And my friends, especially my political friends, were horrified. And so, you know, I lost people that said they were my friends, not because they believed someone was an amazing congressman or should be in office. They told me we just don't do that. And, you know, I really thought about it hard, and I thought, that is the worst answer. tell me our country can't live without them, or whatever are positive about them. But instead they said that's not what we do. And I thought, well, who's we? I do what I think's best for the country, and I don't believe in the status quo. And so I suffered backlash way before the book started from that. And I had people, let me go, clients, because they did not want to encourage what I consider a healthy debate to get the best person. So it started early on, even before the book came out. And then obviously it just intensified afterward.
I can only imagine. It's kind of like you spilling the beans, telling the truth that people don't know what's going on behind the curtain. And all of these things, it's like you're showing the dirty laundry of Washington. And I'm sure that could not have been well received.
Right. They want to keep doing what they're doing. They want to preserve the status quo. And they hope Americans don't pay attention because it benefits them.
And back when we first created the Constitution and the House and the Senate, it's all about checks and balance. It's all was supposed to represent the United States citizens and not be self-serving. So I think your book is an amazing book, and I think so many should read it just to be more enlightened and to be more well versed on this dynamics that we think is occurring, but really don't speak from a point of accurate knowledge. And so you provide some of that in your book for us, which is really great. Politics is such a visceral environment. Can you just share, what was a typical day for you? When did you start and when did you end? And, just the emotional roller coaster that must have been quite intense.
Well, it was. Every day was an emotional roller coaster. I loved it. Politics, I believe, represented the greatest ideals of our society, but it meant getting up at dark and answering emails and taking those phone calls and going into the office and sitting in front of a computer for hours without end and realizing you hadn't ate, and doing fundraisers, not just one a day, but 3 a day sometimes. It's constantly raising money. And at the end of the day, being exhausted and then starting all over again in the morning and hoping you could make it through a few hours of sleep without the crisis calls. So it sounds crazy because I loved it, and we did everything, from writing speeches to grassroots knocking on doors, all these exciting things. And my favorite part about it was meeting those American citizens that weren't running for office, that gave so generously of their time and their money. And, they didn't need that headache. They didn't need to do that, but they wanted to. And I have been pleasantly surprised at the people who have reached out to me from that standpoint that said, what you said is true. And I know they don't like to hear it, but I'm amazed that there's people out there like that, that could be doing nothing and choose not to.
Right. And really kudos for you to take that on. And it's not like you were trying to make anyone appear bad. It's more how the system has become corrupted, kind of a crooks, as you call it, clients are crooks. They're just self-serving, and that they're not really necessarily representing the best for the Americans. I'm sure maybe you could talk a little bit about this, about how, the negotiations, I'll vote this way if you vote this way, how much of that is going on?
Well, I think it goes back to what you were saying of, we say good people. I wanted to work for the people in the white hats, but really, good and bad and loyalty and everything kind of gets jumbled together. And Washington, D.C. pulls out the bad in you. And it even goes on with the staff. It's important that we have staff that serve. There's an institutional knowledge that goes along with that, but there's also, if you stay in too long, you also self-serve and you become a bureaucrat. And I think that's what you're talking about, is sometimes in those legislation getting passed, staff's trying to impress the other, make sure they get something for themselves or for the largest employer in their district. And maybe why you can see the benefits of that, the greater benefits are that it hurts things rather than helps things.
Right, right. It is so true. Let me look at my notes here because I have a couple other questions. So I loved in the beginning of your book, your mom said that she could see you on television, and your father had said it came down to you taking down the Cattlemen Association. You have been actually involved in television politics, doing what's right. And where do you think you got that sensibility from?
Well, I grew up in a small town called Hopkinsville, Kentucky, and probably the worst that can be said about them is I went out quite naive in the world. But, I was so fortunate to have strong family and people that said, you work hard enough, you can do it. And I might have been silly enough to believe everything they said. But, it was to make a difference. I feel like at the end of the day, we have to decide what is our purpose in this life. And I felt mine was to tell other people's stories in a way that got people to invest in them through money or votes and put them in elected office.
So by you writing this book, does that mean that there's no way you could go back into the political arena?
I wouldn't want to do it, but it's funny. So many people would say absolutely you wouldn't be allowed, but
right.
The reality is if you have a good list and you're good at what you do, they'll hire you to win, and then they'll fire you afterwards. The whole point is people will use you up for what they need and then let you go when they're done. And that's part of it. There's a birth and a death, and it's how long is that life?
How long you're serving their purpose, why they've hired you. And once that's been exploited or you no longer serve that value, then you're either going to be the slaughtered sheep, or you're just going to be, fired, like you said. So there is a lot of using up. I'm sorry, what did you say?
Yes, it's a brutal business politics, and it's funny because I loved it so much. But I think that part I've served what I was supposed to do doing that. I've again told this story with the best of hopes that it makes a difference. But I also wrote it so I could move forward, and now my life is doing something completely different and relaxing here in Belize.
In some way, do you feel that writing this book has actually cleansed your soul? It's allowed you to allow that dirtiness, if you will, which you participated to some extent in the whole system, right? By writing this, there was a cleansing, a way of releasing that?
Well, I do, because I make it clear in the book. I'm no different. I thought of myself as a good person, but it brings out the worst in you. And sometimes when you're most successful, you're doing things that my mother certainly wouldn't be proud of. And the reason you do it is because you're rewarded financially. You're rewarded. So I want the book to be believable. I don't think I'm above it. So I share those stories of things I've done too. And I guess there is a healing process with that. I was aware of what I would do, and when I would catch myself crossing the line, so to speak, you catch yourself and pull yourself back. But I think if that happens too many times, you have a harder and harder time doing that.
Right. So can you tell us in this interview really quickly, what are your best stories that are in your book that you think is really a great intro for people to hear about in this interview and that will want them to go read your book?
Well, there's a couple stories. One is most people have heard about Ron Paul. He ran for president multiple times. He was a congressman from Texas, and his son is a senator in Kentucky now, which is where I'm from. And I swore to everyone I would never work for them. Obviously, I supported Mitt Romney for president, but it was one of those moments where I couldn't say no. And I had my husband, who's a CPA. We were at this event, and he wanted to ask him about his Audit the Fed campaign. And I finally said, what's so wrong with the Federal Reserve being audited? Probably sounds like a good idea. And he said, well, it's already being audited. And I said, you know what? I'm sure it's just something for them to say. Let's ask them about it in private at this reception. And of course, I was the one raising the money and doing everything. So it's a friendly audience. And I knew I had been a horrible person taking them on as a client, because when my husband, who audits auditors, asks this, they didn't quite seem to realize it was audited. And he went on to say, well, Deloitte audited and they released their opinion. Do you not agree with it? You think someone else? And they were just, eyes wide open, mouth, and could say nothing. And I said, this is amazing. Someone has been in office for decades, ran for president of the United States. Now his son's a senator who ran for president of the United States, and they don't even know their own policies. And so, but this is told, not to me, but most people who hear that, it's told in a funny way, and they find it humorous as well as sad.
Very good, very interesting. So one last question. How did you come up with your title for your book, Clients to Crooks?
Well, it was about the fifth or sixth title. I was paralyzed because, again, I wrote it as a journal to myself at first. And I had cunning and ambitious, and why won't you debate me? And I was explaining to someone, these are just titles, but it's not good. And they said, well, tell me about it. And I said, well, it's a story of my clients who I just admired so, crossing over to the dark side and becoming crooks. And this was a total stranger. And she said, well, that's it. It's from clients to crooks.
Excellent.
And that's how it happened. And after that, we talked about the cover and all. And the first draft was handcuffs and orange uniforms. And I said, no. Not that women don't belong in jail, but in politics, crooks is like Nixon. It's a cheat. And so that's how it all evolved.
That's great. Why don't you show your cover again? And maybe you can go through your cover real quick and show them what you hope the cover would really reveal.
I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, go ahead and describe why you settled on that cover.
Oh, well, because it shows the Richard Nixon pose of when he was leaving office, except one of the hands is turned the other way. So it's kind of a play on the words crooks and politics to bring up that, and kind of a play on it.
I love it. That's great. Well, Leslie, this has been fabulous. Why don't you tell everyone where they can get your book, where they can connect with you on your website, and give them information.
It's clientstocrooks.com, and there's links to Amazon and all the other Barnes and Nobles, Books A Million, where their preference is to buy it. And then also there they can read the first chapter as well.
Oh, great. That's great. And if you want to buy the book online, it's available, as you just said, but also at any bookstore. And if that bookstore doesn't have it in stock, you just have to ask them, and they'll actually be able to get it and order it and get it into you. So you can call your bookstore, ask them, do you have it? If they don't, ask them to order, and they'll let you know when it comes in. So, well, thank you very much. Is there anything else you want to add before we leave?
Well, I obviously welcome anyone's feedback, and I hope that they'll take an opportunity to read this story and see what they can do to make the political system better, because we certainly need it right now with the tone that's going on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for taking time from Belize. We so appreciate it and wish you much success on your book, and so happy that you brought this information to the public. And hopefully it allows the political arena to transform and to remember what they're really serving for.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, all. Until the next time we see each other, you are powerful beyond measure, and remember that you can make a difference in life. Thank you. Take care.